Yes, my name is Charles Ward, Charlie to my friends. On my mother's side, she's Gillian Barker, so that's the Barker family who are shoemakers and have been shoemakers for many years in the village of Elsbarton. I'm a Ward and we're farmers in the village, although interestingly we did originally have a shoe factory as well called Ward and Sheffield. It's interesting really because it was my great-great-grandfather Arthur Barker who started the business in 1880 in one of the roads called North Road, just off the Wellingborough Road, north part of the village. Previously, many of the shoemakers were working in little cottages in their back gardens, and they would literally transport the shoes between the cottages themselves. So it was at that point in 1880 that great-great-grandfather Barker decided to form a factory. 33 original employees of the factory on the 1880 picture. And on the front row, there's a young lady called Julie Barker. I think there's 6 Barkers in total in the whole picture. Julie Barker sits on the front row on the far left. And in the very early 60s, I was born in 1958, the very early 60s, my mother used to take me into Sunnyside, an adjoining road to where I live in London End. And there was a tall house there, many floors, maybe 4 floors. And I can remember climbing them and going into a bedroom, and a little wizened lady lying in bed. She was bedridden, and that was Aunt Dewey, as we called her. And she originates from that original picture. Well, I left school quite early, as many people in the shoe industry did. I certainly didn't go to university. I left school at 16. And I went into the shoe factory at Barker's, which then was established in Station Road, Elsbarton, by my grandfather, Albert Barker. And so he was a huge influence on myself. And one of the earliest memories I have is going down to the factory in the early 60s with Grandpa Barker and walking in the door. And the first thing that hits you when you go into a shoe factory is actually the noise, the screaming and the welt sewers clattering away. It's an astonishing sight when you first go in. And quite frightening for a young boy, but I formed an opinion very early on that I'd love to be a shoemaker. So when I left school, I went to work at Barker's and attended Rushton Boot and Shoe College. Well, one of the first jobs is the clicking room, as you know, and often situated at the top of the shoe factory where it's nice and light. The heavy machinery was always located on the ground floor for obvious reasons. So I was there with the clickers. And an early job they give a new employee to the clicking room is to fetch out a blade. And the clicking blades are often made from hacksaw blade. And so there'd be various grinding stations around the clicking room, and they would show you how to fashion this very sharp blade. And of course, the name clicking comes from the actual sound of the leather being cut around the patterns. That's the clicking note. So I joined Barker's in around about 1975-76, and I stayed there until 1980. In 1980, the company, now being run by my uncle William Barker, celebrated its 100th anniversary. And rather bizarrely, Uncle William decided to take the whole factory on a cruise to Denmark, which was certainly a little random, but nevertheless, the whole factory disembarked from Felixstowe on a cruise to Denmark. Quite a few people in those days, maybe 400 people. So it was quite a sight to see everybody. And previous to that, we had the 100-year photograph taken at the Station Road factory, which was quite a sight. So it was a big company. And my grandfather, Albert Barker, who'd built the company up, you know, from those very early days of great-great-grandfather Arthur's start in North Road. He was probably one of the greatest shoe designers in the world at one point, and actually developed quite a few patents that are still used to this day. My grandfather was very keen to maintain a social club, a welfare club as he called it, for the factory employees. And my mother Gillian, who by this time had brought the children up, my brother and my sister, myself, she was actually helping by this time run the canteen. Because my grandfather used to say it's very important that you have a hot meal at lunchtime, and this was heavily subsidised. There was a social club that met at weekends, film shows we used to watch. And you may remember in Northampton, there was a very interesting location called the Salon Ballroom. And every year we would have a factory party at the Salon with speeches and then lots of dancing and merriment. So yes, he did look after his employees very, very well. But in 1985, I'd always been quite keen on photography. I'd done quite a bit of photography in the shoe factory, actually, taking pictures of the shoes. So in 1985, I decided to start my own commercial photography business up, specialising in product photography. In the early days, we were taking all the pictures on film, and we grew to a reasonable sized business, about 6 employees, working out in my father's farm buildings in Elsbarton. He, by this time, had joined Barker's Shoe Factory. He'd come off the farm and gone into the shoe factory. So the farm buildings were left empty. So I can always remember saying to my father, "What are you doing with that barn?" And he said, "Why? What do you want it for?" I said, "Oh, just a bit of photography." "How long for?" "About 6 weeks." And next year it's 40 years since I first established in the factory. So the digital camera was quite a big expense for us, huge expense in fact, because this was very new technology, quite complicated, and we decided to take the risk and buy this camera. We'd heard that Dr. Martens were having a lot of product photography taken at their Wollaston branch, and we decided to set up a demonstration in the studio with this digital camera, which in those days was very different than our iPhones and cameras that we use today. It involved coloured wheels in front of the lens that revolved round. It took about 11 seconds to capture an image, and of course there was a little cable running from the camera to the computer, great big monitor. And the clients from Dr. Martens were just concentrating on the boot that was being photographed and didn't notice the picture appear on the screen. So when I asked them, invited them to turn and look at the picture, they jumped back as if you were some kind of witch doctor. And on the basis of that demonstration, I did 27 years of working with Dr. Martens, photographed many hundreds of thousands of their boots, and then a chance meeting with one of the directors at Trickers walking the dog around the block one evening, a gentleman called David Jeffries, who has connections with the shoe trade himself. He asked me what I was doing, and I said, I've got a commercial studio taking a lot of food pictures, but I do a lot of shoes, David. And he invited me to come in and have a chat. And so I went into the shoe factory in Northampton, which is based on Abington Square. Iconic shoe factory, 3 stories high, really steep stairs, but just wonderful to go back in again. And all those memories of working at Barker's came flooding back. And I was delighted to take upon his opportunity to photograph these beautiful country shoes that are still made in Northamptonshire. So Trickers Shoes started in 1829. So they are one of the longest established companies in the country.